Hi, I'm Dimitra Scott. I am a lawyer here at Beresford Booth, and I'm the chair of our family law group. Within our family law group, we have an adoption and an assisted reproduction practice. Today, I'm here to talk to you about second parent adoptions in the state of Washington. What is a second parent adoption? Often these come in several different forms. You might be immediately thinking that this is an adoption by a step parent who wants to adopt a child. That is and could be considered a second parent adoption, but that's not what I'm going to talk to you about today. And that is something I will present on in a future webinar. Today, I want to talk about second parent adoptions in the context of parties who were either unmarried at the time a child was born and someone was not listed on a birth certificate. Perhaps the child was conceived through an assisted reproductive process. Or sometimes we have situations where simply both parents weren't identified on a birth certificate at the time. Even if your name is identified on a child's birth certificate and your child was born here in the state of Washington, it's likely the product of parentage which was established by statutory authority. So every state is different, and not every state follows the Uniform Parentage Act or some version of it. So not all states have a statutory theme to establish parentage, but Washington does. Here are some of the common ways that people establish parentage from a statutory perspective. If you are a woman who gave birth to a child, your parentage was established automatically. There's also a presumption of parentage for any child born when you are the spouse of the woman who gave birth to the child. But that presumption can be challenged or overcome by a judicial proceeding. You may be an adjudicated parent. That means that your parentage has been established by court order already. Or you may be an acknowledged parent, meaning at the time the child was born, although you were not married to the person who gave birth to the child, you signed off on a document that was then submitted to the Department of Health in the state of Washington, where you acknowledged that you wanted to be the parent of the child. Again, an acknowledged parent can later have their parentage challenged. Finally, you may have established parentage through the Department of Health, meaning you may have established parentage of a child who was born through an assisted reproductive process, and you had a contract with respect to that assisted reproductive process, and you identified yourself as someone who wanted to be a legal parent of any child born. So you may have then signed an acknowledgement at the time the child was born, or you may have been married to the person to whom the child was born, and therefore your name ended up on a birth certificate. Finally, parentage can be established through adoption of a child. So if any of those conditions apply to you, any condition that it does not include a court order adjudicating your parentage or adoption, then you may need to consider a second parent adoption. Why? Well, because that's how you're going to establish legal parentage of a child that is enforceable across all states. What I just described to you in the previous slide is the statutory authority granting parentage under Washington law. You may have a birth certificate that identifies each of you as legal parents, but if you don't have a court order that confirms your parentage or adopts the child, your birth certificate is not affirmative proof of parentage. In today's climate, not all states recognize the parentage statutes in Washington. So even if both parents are listed on a child's birth certificate, for example, in a same-sex marriage or after a child's conceived through assisted reproduction, not every state will automatically recognize each of you as legal parents with equal legal rights to raise that child. So a second parent adoption creates a court order, a decree of adoption, which must be recognized in all 50 states under the U.S. Constitution's full faith and credit clause. That is a powerful tool. And it is what a lot of people seek to do in today's climate, just to ensure legal parentage of the child is confirmed in them and is recognized outside the boundaries of Washington state. Again, that second parent adoption can also help to reduce the risk of any future legal challenges. So as noted, the statutory basis for parentage may be subject to challenges. I noted on that first slide that an acknowledged parent, so you signed the form telling the Department of Health you wanted to be a parent of the child, that can be challenged within certain timeframes. If you have a second parent adoption, no longer does that challenge exist. Without an adoption, a non-biological or a non-gestational parent can actually face challenges if parentage is questioned in the future. That could be during a future child custody dispute, in the event of a medical emergency where you need to make decisions for the child, and particularly if you move to another state outside the state of Washington that has a different statutory scheme. A second parent adoption will help to secure parental rights. It is stronger than simply a presumption of parentage, acknowledgement of parentage under the statutory scheme. And once you have that document in hand, it helps to provide clarity to any third parties who question whether you have authority to make decisions with respect to that child, whether that's a hospital, a school, a government agency. An adoption decree removes all doubt. It also helps to just secure and ensure any rights to inheritance and benefits that the child may be entitled to as a result of your legal parentage of the child. Things like Social Security benefits, veterans benefits, insurance coverage. Some of these things look to federal law and not Washington state's statutory scheme. So having that order, decree of adoption, clarifies your legal parentage of the child and therefore entitles the child to whatever benefits may be available outside the state of Washington and on a federal level. Finally, there are some international considerations. Outside of the states of Washington, outside the United States of America, there are some countries where a birth certificate alone, which names two parents, particularly if they have the same sex, it may not be recognized in another country. But an adoption decree often carries far more legal weight abroad. So it gives you greater security when traveling with your child to be able to make all decisions with respect to your child's care. So if any of those questions, concerns, or issues I just discussed raise a question in your mind about whether a second parent adoption is appropriate for you, it's always a good idea to have a consultation with an attorney like me or any of the other adoption attorneys in our area who can help guide you through whether this is something you should do and if it fits for your situation. If you do want to move forward, let me tell you a bit about what you'll have to do. It is a relatively straightforward process, save one initial step. Unfortunately, a second parent adoption still requires a pre-placement home study. We generally do these as one visit. It's a pre-post placement report combined. It's conducted by an independent social worker, and it includes a home visit, references, a complete review of your finances, criminal background clearances, including an FBI, state, and child abuse network check. You'll have to have a physician's clearance. And ultimately, the social worker has to make a recommendation that your second parent adoption is in the best interest of the child. That sounds crazy because you're thinking, I'm already a parent of this child. The child has been with us since birth. Why on earth would we need to have a social worker give a blessing to us to be able to adopt our own child? And I agree. It does seem like an onerous first step. But that is what our statute requires in Washington because we do not yet have a specific carve out for these second parent adoption circumstances. It is something we're hoping to do in the future, but that's outside the scope of this webinar today. So your first step is to get that combined pre-post placement report with an independent adoption social worker. And we have a number of referrals and references we can provide to you so that you can get that process started when you're ready. Once you have selected who your social worker will be, that's when we can take over. We file a petition for adoption and confirmation of parentage, because the goal of this is to confirm parentage and the adoption for both parents, just to make sure that there are no ambiguities in the future. We may begin gathering any supporting documents and affidavits. We might need your help with that. Depending on the circumstances of how your child was conceived, it may be that we need a declaration or an affidavit from the fertility clinic doctor to attest to the type of assisted reproductive process that was involved. We may need copies of any donor agreements if there were any donors involved in providing gametes for creation of this life. So that's what we'll be doing while you're simultaneously working on your pre and post placement report. Once your pre and post placement report is done, we should be ready to move to your finalization phase. At that point, we schedule a finalization hearing. You, the petitioners, must be present, and the child should also appear. There are circumstances where perhaps a child cannot appear, and that's something that we can talk about, but in most circumstances, you should just count on the child being present for that finalization hearing. Both petitioners have to be sworn in under oath to testify, but don't worry, it really won't be an onerous conversation. The hearing itself lasts maybe 15 minutes total, and I'll be there to walk you through all of the questions. There are no tricks in this process. Once you've gone through and provided your testimony, then the court ultimately will issue a final order, which is a decree of adoption and confirmation of parentage. You will leave the courthouse that day with that document in hand, having closed the loop with respect to any future challenges or concerns regarding your parentage of this child. Usually, we can schedule that finalization hearing within 2 weeks of you completing your pre-post placement report. So it can go pretty quick. In addition, you don't have to be physically present at the courthouse to finalize this hearing or to finalize this adoption. Primarily, we do them via Zoom at your option. And there are some limited circumstances where you don't have to appear in person or by Zoom. Those circumstances are limited and something I'd have to discuss with you. What happens next? From your perspective, probably nothing. You're done. You're going to take that order. You're going to put it in the safe. You're going to have it for future reference if you ever need it. However, I recommend closing the loop. We would, at the same time as filing your final order, request that the Department of Health issue a new amended birth certificate for your child that identifies both of you as legal parents. And I know you're thinking, our birth certificate already identifies us as legal parents. And I agree. But this new amended record that should come maybe 8 weeks after your hearing, it'll have a new record ID number, and it'll have an issue date after the date of your adoption decree. And to me, that helps close the loop so that all of your documents match if you ever need something in the future. It's also good to note at this juncture that if you did want to do a name change for the child, if there's anything wonky about that original birth certificate, this is your chance to do that in this second parent adoption process. So as I said, the process is relatively straightforward. I think it's a great way to ensure your parentage in the future, at least to avoid any potential challenges or changes in the law, or if you plan to move outside the state of Washington or travel abroad, or if your child may need federal benefits in the future. If we can help, we'd be more than happy to do so. My contact information is here on this last slide. Thank you for tuning into our webinar today. Take care.